I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Many cancer patients are prescribed opioids to manage pain associated with their disease, but studies have shown that the use of these painkillers naturally mute the immune response and can reduce the efficacy of immunotherapies. Glycyx Therapeutics is developing a drug it believes can allow opioids to relieve pain while preventing them from working against immunotherapies. We spoke to Lorin Johnson, Chief Scientific Officer of Glycyx, about the effects of opioids on the immune system, the company's experimental therapy designed to mitigate the negative effects of opioids in cancer patients being treated with checkpoint inhibitors, and why its drug in development may promote gut health in these patients more broadly. Lorin, thanks for joining us.
Sure, Dan. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
We're going to talk about the effects of opioids on the immune system in people with cancer, Glycyx Therapeutics, and its experimental therapy, Acceleprand, to work in conjunction with immune checkpoint inhibitors. Well, let's start with opioid use, though. How widely used are these painkillers in cancer patients today?
Well, Dan, it's surprisingly high. Cancer pain is still primarily treated with opioids. Approximately 50% of cancer patients take opioids for pain control. Many times, the initiating symptom for cancer diagnosis is pain. So the patient will come into the doctor with a pain that they can't figure out where it's coming from, and they finally say, "Oh, you've got cancer." And they may be on opioids right from the beginning. In addition, during the first surgery to remove cancerous tissue, opioids may be prescribed initially for surgical pain. And a high percentage of these patients remain on chronic opioid therapy after that, continuing through their cancer journey. So it depends on the cancer, and we're going to talk about that, but it's at least half and maybe more.
And how common is it for opioids to be used simultaneously when a patient is being given an immune checkpoint inhibitor?
Well, that does depend on the type of cancer. As you know, checkpoint inhibitors are indicated for, I don't know, about 18 different types of cancers. And opioid use varies among those different types of cancers. So if you look across the board, and we've looked at this analysis, it averages about 45%. But if you look at subgroups, let's take, for example, head and neck cancer. Cancers, in your mouth or your esophagus, they're very painful. Just the fact that they're there, you can't swallow. Very painful. So up to 70% of head and neck patients will be on opioid therapy for their cancer pain. On the other end, you go all the way down to melanoma. Melanoma isn't that painful until you get metastases in various places. So it may be down around 15 to 20% is all. But we'll come back to melanoma because that's a very special case in this opioid network, and we'll talk a little more about that. So it varies by cancer type. It can be as high as 70% and as low as 15%.
One of the great advances in treating cancer have been the advent of immunotherapies, notably checkpoint inhibitors. How does cancer work to evade the immune system?
So there are a variety of mechanisms, and this is quite a wide area of research, and so I will admit I'm not an expert in this area, but what we know is that there are a variety of mechanisms, and one mechanism is cancer cells can start making checkpoint ligands. Normal cells normally make checkpoint ligands, and as we're going to talk about, these ligands help turn off the immune system. So cancer cells can start expressing increased quantities of checkpoint ligands to secrete towards the immune cells that may be approaching them and turn them off. Another way that tumors can evade the immune system is tumors can build a stroma around themselves. They can surround themselves in extra tissue that the immune system can't get through. And remember, the immune system has to interact directly with the tumor cell. It's a physical contact that has to take place for the tumor cells to, I'm sorry, for the immune cells to recognize the tumor cells as foreign. So if they can't get there because there's tissue in the way, that's another way. The other thing that happens is the T cells, the effector cells from the immune system, have to be in the right phenotype. And that means the various collection of cytokines that are in the area around the tumor, and the tumor can alter the production of those. And so the T cell phenotype may not be right to help kill the tumor cell. And then another way is through what we're going to talk about, the opioid system. Tumor cells actually make endogenous opioids in the form of beta endorphin. And these can suppress a variety of actions of the immune system. And we'll talk more about that. But so it's several mechanisms. It's very complex, but we're just starting to unravel where some of these control points are.
It's so fascinating that the opioid system naturally works to suppress the immune system. What happens to the immune system when someone with cancer is treated with an opioid?
As you know, the opioid system, we know it for pain control. And it does a good job controlling pain. Opioids in the brain, in particular, centrally control pain that may be perceived in the periphery. But the opioid system is also part of the fight or flight stress response. Um, so, as part of that, it is elevated in conjunction with another or a group of hormones that are there to aid survival. And one thing that you don't need in the acute state, let's say you're in the Serengeti and the lion bites you, you're probably going to run. You don't need to start mounting an antibody response to anything that was in the lion's mouth. So that part of the immune system is suppressed by opioids. It's like let's deal with that later. The opioids that come out are there to control the pain, the local pain, and some of the other peptides that come out in the same precursor are there to help heal the wound, help in electrolyte and glucose metabolism. And opioids, when given acutely, actually activate the innate immune system and suppress the chronic immune system. So this is also one of the other reasons that this has been quite controversial, because as it's been studied, these pathways have only been studied since about the end of 1970s, early 80s. And there are these dual mechanisms that have been discovered. And it's now just being pointed out that it's a continuum. Opioids are meant to be there acutely and then go away. They have short half lives, these opioid peptides. But when a cancer patients take opioids to control their cancer pain, they're taking them chronically. And this is a chronic pushing the button to suppress the immune system.
I know there have been a number of studies that have looked at how patients using checkpoint inhibitors with opioids compared to those that use checkpoint inhibitors alone. What have those studies shown?
These studies started to come out in around 2020, 2021, and quite large meta analyses and analyses of thousands of patients. Investigators wanted to understand what was going on with different concomitant medications that cancer patients take. One of the best first publications was by Professor Cordellini from Rome, uh, who showed that in 1,000 cancer patients, opioids, antibiotics, uh, and corticosteroids interfered with the immune checkpoint response. And he found that the opioid effect decreased the longevity of these patients by about half compared to patients not taking opioids. This has been followed up now in several other publications, and across the board, it's about a 50% reduction in the response rate that that patients have to immune therapy if they're on opioids.
It's just astounding to me. Is this understood by oncologists and physicians who treat patients, or are they making a decision to trade off a balance between the patient's comfort and the efficacy of the checkpoint inhibitor?
Well, that's the bit that you've hit it right there. Our biggest problem is we don't have other pain medications. Um, so it is very surprising. We have questioned many companies who have had failed checkpoint studies and ask them, go back and look at your data. See if your study failed because you had a high concentration of opioid patients. And sometimes that happens. So even among companies that are doing studies, they don't exclude opioid patients because that would be excluding half the patient population.
Glycyx is developing Accelopran. It's an experimental therapy that's well, what is Accelopran and how does it work?
So Excelopran is of the class of compounds that have been named PAMORAs, and that stands for peripherally active mu opioid receptor antagonists. And receptor opioid receptor antagonists have been around a long time. We all know naloxone that is used in opioid overdose. You know, you take it in a nasal spray now, Narcan, and it works very fast. You can bring people right around, within minutes of the dose because these antagonists go to the opioid receptors and they knock the opioid off the receptor. They bind to the receptor, but they don't activate the receptor. So they are opioid antagonists. But the key with this new class of compounds, the PAMORAs, is that they don't enter the brain. So they're peripherally active. They stay out in the tissues and they hit opioid receptors at all the sites outside of the brain, which means the opioids are still acting in the brain. They still control pain, but they don't have the side effects outside of the brain. So it alleviates the side effects on the immune system, on the GI tract, and any place else where the opioid receptors are active.
My understanding is that the activity of Accelopran is in the gut and doesn't affect opioid receptors in the brain. Does it have any effect on the use of opioids to treat pain?
No. And in fact, this class of compounds, Accelopran, in addition, have all been tested in patients with chronic pain who are on opioids and have debilitating constipation, because that is one of the primary effects of opioids on the gut. Uh, Motility comes to a screeching halt when patients take opioids for any length of time over a few days. And that's can be devastating because when motility stops, bacteria in the colon are able to move up the gut into the small intestine. And when they're in the small intestine, they're making bacterial products in a place that's somewhat permeable, and bacterial products can get into the circulation and start a process of systemic inflammation and essentially sterile sepsis. And so these drugs were developed to stop the constipation, and they are very effective doing that. Just like Narcan brings a patient out of a coma immediately, uh, giving a patient one of these antagonists, these Pamora antagonists, will restart their bowels within a few hours, and sometimes in less than an hour. They're very effective when given at the right dose. They're very safe. Um, Patients do notice that their GI tract turns back on, and that can be painful at sometimes. So we manage the dose very carefully in the way we treat these patients. But we believe there is a connection between what uh, th- what we're seeing in cancer progression and the health of the GI tract. Now, that's not the only thing that's going on because we know our opioid antagonist, Accelopran, has direct actions on immune cells, on new blood vessel formation, and other actions outside of the GI tract. But it also is creating a healthy GI tract, which is also now known to contribute to the efficacy of checkpoint inhibitors.
Well, how was its potential to enhance T cell infiltration into tumors recognized?
Well, it's somewhat of a long story, but it's fairly straightforward. My former company, Salix Pharmaceuticals, sells the first Pamora of this class. That's methyl naltrexone, Relistor, and they sell it for opiate-induced constipation. And back in 2013 and 14, I went back and did an analysis of our phase 3 and phase 4 studies, and this was a patient population of palliative care patients, so end of life patients. About 50% were cancer patients. And we looked at the cancer patients and we found out if we solved their bowel motility problem, they lived longer and they lived at least twice as long. And these were patients who were dying within a few weeks. Some of them lived out to 3 months. And it was a significant effect. We published that in the Annals of Oncology in 2016. Salix was bought by Bausch Health in 2015. We tried to get Salix and Bausch to continue this type of work, and they weren't that interested because they're a GI company. Oncology is a whole different game, different people at FDA, different endpoints. So we set up a Glycyx to go and look at this in a little more detail. And one of the first things we did is we said, well, let's test Pamoras in various models, preclinical models. And one of the models is where you grow tumor cells on the membrane of a chicken embryo. So you can open the top of the egg, and you can actually drop tumor cells onto the membrane, the chorioallantoic membrane, and they will grow into a tumor and they will metastasize on that membrane down to the bottom where new blood vessels are forming, and you can measure the growth and you can measure the metastasis. And one of the striking things we found was that when we added um, checkpoint inhibitors to that model system and Accelopran, there was a striking elevation of cells that came into the tumor, uh, over 20-fold. And it was really surprising to us. So we said, well, let's go look in other animal models. We went to mice. We looked at melanoma. We looked at colon cancer. We looked at oral cancer, part of head and neck cancer. And we were able to show that we could potentiate the influx of immune cells into these cancers in all cases when we paired Accelopran with um, checkpoint inhibitors.
Accelopram was originally being developed by Theravance to treat opioid-induced constipation. How did you come to develop it?
So, as I said, my previous company, Salix, when we first acquired Relistor, I went around and looked at all of these drugs. And I knew the Theravance compound because I had looked at it. We thought maybe we would acquire that for opiate induced constipation. But Relistor was further along. It was it was just being approved by FDA, so we didn't have to do any additional clinical trials. So when Salix decided not to go forward in cancer, I went back to Theravance and I said, "Look, we've published this survival data in cancer, and they were aware of that. Um, why don't you let us test it and see what happens?" And that they agreed. And in 2020, we executed a license agreement. We acquired the worldwide rights to Accelopran from Theravance because they had stopped development. Their program had been a little behind, and they were going to be fourth to the market, and they had other priorities, so they put it on the shelf. So we were able to acquire a product that had been through phase 2B for an indication. We knew all the safety, we knew how to dose the product, and we knew we would have a, a quick shot at an early IND to get it in the clinic for cancer. And that's how we acquired it.
And can you explain the regulatory path for this? It appears you have to go cancer by cancer. Is that correct? And do you look at this in a mix of different checkpoint inhibitors, or do you have to choose a single one?
So we can't do both. We can't have a mix of cancers and a mix of checkpoint inhibitors. So we got to start with one or the other. Basically, we can look at a few different cancers that a single checkpoint inhibitor is approved for. So the leader is pembrolizumab, Keytruda. And it's approved for 18 cancers. So it's standard of care in so many of these cancers. That's a good one to start with. So we can then look at different cancers, and we can choose our basket of cancers that we might want to look at. And in early studies, have maybe two or three, let's say three cancers that we're going to look at. And the ones we're most interested in are head and neck because of the high opioid use, lung cancer because it's the biggest in terms of number of patients, and immunotherapy is used in many of those patients. And then melanoma, and melanoma is a special case, and we can talk about that in a second. But we're going to focus on those three, and we'll do early studies to see what the signal strength is going to be based on combining our drug with pembrolizumab. Uh, and based on that, that will then that data will then we'll sit down with FDA and say, okay, what do you think is the best go for next? in randomized controlled studies because we would then have to do placebo-controlled studies for the approval. So
Have you actually considered doing a basket trial?
yes, yes, we have. We have. And, you start small, with, maybe 20 patients of each tumor type, see what the response rates are compared to historic controls, and then from that, you use that to determine the size of a controlled study that you would need to do.
The other thing that is not obvious to me is what you would use for endpoints. Would you evaluate the traditional types of endpoints, such as cancer-free progression or survivability, or would you look at something more akin to a biomarker that would indicate its effects on the immune system
Well,
or pain?
yeah, so we always look at pain. We always measure pain. We wanna make sure that our antagonist is not somehow getting into the brain, and altering the pain response. So pain is always looked at. But, endpoints are they're pretty standard now in early studies where you look at the objective response rate. Uh, and there are criteria that you use to show the tumor has progressed or not. It's either gotten worse, it's stayed the same, or it's gotten better. And you can see some of these changes over the course of even 2, immunotherapy cycles, 2 to 4 immunotherapy cycles. So these are early readouts to get an indication of how big a study you might need to do when you do a randomized study. But for approvals, you will need to go all the way to progression free survival and overall survival, and that's what FDA is looking for. So, early biomarkers give you a hint of what may be happening, but in the end, you have to follow these patients all the way out to, their natural death and show that you have influenced the progression of the disease all the way to the end.
Sure. What's known about Accelopran from the studies you've done to date?
So, as I said, we inherited a database, from patients that have been opioid-induced constipation patients who have been dosed with Accelopran, and that illuminated, the dose ranges that need to be used to saturate the opioid receptors in the periphery. So over 500 patients have been dosed. The safety profile has been well worked out. We have a very special dosing, where we start patients at a medium dose and raise the dose, and this has contributed to the efficacy and the duration of efficacy, seen in these patients. So we don't have to go through any of the early, uh, new cancer therapies. You're usually concerned about safety. We have no safety issues with this. We do have, obviously, this has never been paired with a checkpoint inhibitor, and we will have to cautiously explore that combination. But Accelopran itself, we know the dose we need to use, and we know what the safety signals are that we can look for. So we're not at square one when we start these studies, and we're essentially adding standard of care. So we're adding Accelopran that we know is safe in the opioid patient population and standard of care checkpoint inhibitor. So it's really just looking for that signal of efficacy to know how big a study one has to do for the approval process.
You're also exploring Accelopran for gastrointestinal indications. What's the potential there?
Well, what we learned from the opioid-induced constipation patients is that if these patients are not treated early in that process, you can't rescue them. So the chronic pain patients that were part of the constipation studies had been long-term back pain, and some cancer pain. I said in the palliative care, but all the approvals are in chronic pain, non-cancer pain patients. And you can only rescue about 60% of those patients. The others are refractory. So we went back to the GI division at FDA and we said, we think we should try prophylaxis. We think we should start this therapy when patients go on an opioid. And that's how we want to treat cancer patients. So we'll treat them before they get the constipation and keep the constipation from happening. Their motility will not slow down. They won't have these bad effects in the gut where their microbiome becomes dysbiotic. And overall, it's going to be better for their cancer progression from that standpoint, too, regardless of what cancer therapy they're on. FDA agreed with that. And so we have an open IND to look at prophylaxis of opioid induced constipation in cancer patients. The other place where uh, the opioids in cancer come into play is end of life. So when everything has failed and patients are terminal, they are many times put on opioids. And opioids accelerate cachexia. And there are now studies showing that this wasting disease that happens at end of life is in part accelerated by the opioids that they're taking for end of life. So we think that is related to their GI function and to some other peripheral actions of the opioid system outside of the gut and maybe in muscle tissue itself. And so we're interested in the interaction of the health of the gut and the rest of the body in end of life cancer patients. So those are the other areas we're looking at.
And what's the development path forward?
The lead is we're just getting ready to go into the clinic in some of these smaller basket type studies. Right now, we're looking at head and neck cancer because 70% of those patients are on opioids. Their response rate to checkpoint inhibitors is about 11%, but it's 30% if you're not on an opioid. So we think we can change that. Uh, we're going to be doing a smaller study in lung cancer, and then another one in melanoma. And we haven't talked about melanoma as much as we could have. I want to point out something that's really quite interesting with melanoma. It's been known for quite some time that melanoma cells make beta endorphin. And so they make their own opioid. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Beta endorphin is made in a large precursor protein called pro opioid melanocortin. And within this larger protein, there are several different hormones. There is ACTH that stimulates the adrenals. There are 3 copies of melanocyte stimulating hormone that causes skin cells to make melanin for UV protection. There is beta lipotropin, which helps in lipid metabolism, and there's beta endorphin for pain control. Uh, and melanoma appears to make this and auto-stimulate itself and suppress the immune system itself. And we have shown that we can work on slowing melanoma cell growth in the absence of added opioids. So even in patients not taking opioids, melanoma is susceptible to the actions of our inhibitor. So we're going to be looking at melanoma patients who have failed checkpoint therapy and have run out of options. And we're just going to add Accelopran at the next round of immunotherapy and see if they start to respond. Because we think it's because they're making enough of their own opioid to inhibit the immune system around them and to help their own growth. So our basket is head and neck, lung, and melanoma. And that's where we're going to start. And we'll see what those response rates are. And we will then go to FDA and say, what do we have to do now? And we have some ideas there, but they're going to be the ones to tell us, the way forward.
And how is the company financed to date?
Well, we have financed it ourselves. The founders have worked for free. We luckily inherited a very clean data package from Theravance. They did great work on this. We inherited a supply chain with a manufacturer who we've been able to go to and turn the crank on and get a whole new batch of Accelopran made. It's gone into capsules now, and we're ready to go into the clinic. So what we need now is a bigger round of financing to support these clinical trials.
What's the plan for raising capital here?
So we're looking at a $30 million raise, which, in the scheme of things is not that large, but that gets this whole front end of the basket completed. It allows us to know what we have to do for registration studies, controlled studies, and we're in the process of raising those funds right now.
Lorin Johnson, Chief Scientific Officer of Glycyx Therapeutics. Lorin, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.